All right, so a couple of things today, a couple of announcements. On Thursday, you will have the opportunity to earn some big bonus points that will go towards your lowest exam score. I don't remember, somebody refresh my memory in this class, if I said that I dropped the lowest exam. If you miss an exam, the final replaces it. Is that what I said in the syllabus in here? Something like that. You don't remember. Nobody bothered to look. Is that what we're telling you?
It doesn't say it in the syllabus.
Are you sure? Are you sure about that?
Pretty sure.
I get my classes confused from what I said from time to time, so let's see. All right, so this is what I said in the syllabus. There will be no makeup exams for exams 1 through 4. If you miss an exam, the final score will substitute for the first missed exam. If you miss 2 exams, you'll receive a 0 for the second exam, barring extraordinary circumstances. The final will be composed of some of the questions from previous exams and some new questions. You will be allowed to keep your exams 1 through 4 so that you may study for the final. Thus, once 1 through 4 have been administered, they have been compromised, and therefore there are no exceptions to the exam makeup policy. What that means is that if I don't drop one of those exam scores and substitute the final, which is the highest, which should probably be the highest exam score you have, it's unfair for people who actually do all 4 exams, because they will not have gotten the benefit of having a score dropped and replaced by the final. So I always, in order to be fair, drop your lowest exam score from 1 through 4 and replace it with the final. Then I will take bonus points that you accumulate from either critical thinking challenges or for the bonus activity that I'm going to give you an opportunity to participate in on Thursday, and add those to the next lowest score. So on Thursday, you have the opportunity to earn 3 bonus points per vendor you visit at a career fair. So we are hosting an external competition in conjunction with our sales program here at UCO. And as part of that, we have a career fair at Tech Systems in Bricktown. So from 9 to 5, if you go to challengersalesinstitute.com, you can see the schedule. From 9 to 5 on Thursday, we are having a career fair. There will be 20 vendors there that are looking for sales people, and they may have some positions. They're primarily targeting at this sales people. I know a lot of you don't want to be salespeople, but you're going to be salespeople. Trust me. Your first job is going to be in business, is going to be in sales. Whether you really want that to be so or not, almost everybody will start out in sales, unless you start out as an accountant, and in which case I'm just going to cry for you. My heart hurts, and it's probably going to be miserable, and you're going to wish you'd gone into sales as your first job. After that, after sitting in front of stale and musty books for hours a day and not doing anything in a closed, dark, damp office at the end of the hall with flickering light bulbs, you're going to wish you'd gone into sales, and you're going to remember this and come back to me and say, "I don't want to job." So you can visit these 3 vendors. In order to get the 3 points, you have to take a resume. So you're going to have to print out 20 copies of your resume and take it, and you're going to have to do a mini speed sell for each of these vendors. So you cannot say things like, "I just want a stamp on my card. Can you just give me my stamp on my card?" You are going to have to engage in a 30-second speed sell. If you don't engage in a 30-second speed sell, they're not going to give it to you. So you decide how many points it is you want to accumulate. There's a possibility of how many points out there. If there are 20 vendors and I'm getting 3 points a piece, there's how many? 60 points. Which is, so you're going to have 1 score that's going to be dropped, and you're going to have the opportunity to make, if you made nothing on another exam, a 60. Let's suppose you skipped a second exam. You would then get a 60 for that exam, as opposed to a 0, which is better. So it's a good deal. So Tech Systems is located, let's see, I forgot to turn this back on. So here's the Challenger Sales Institute. This is the schedule. For the day, it says Thursday, or I'm sorry, Friday. I'm sorry, I said Thursday. Friday. I apologize. Let me clarify. Friday, March 1st, from 9 to 5 is the career fair. So it's Friday. I know it sucks to be on a Friday, but that's the day that we can do it. So it's Friday from 9 to 5, not Thursday. So make sure that you correct that. I'll be sure and correct it when I send out an email. Make sure I have the correct date. The tech system location is at 29 East Reno. That is in Bricktown, and it's Suite 300. So you're going to go to 29 East Reno. That is directly north, for those of you who are familiar with Bricktown, it is directly north of the U-Haul storage facility. There's a parking lot that's a free parking lot there in front of north of the U-Haul facility, and it's right across the street from that parking lot. The building looks like this. It's got the Thunder players on it. That's what it looks like. I think they've updated it because Nick Collison is no longer in the Thunder, so I think they have updated that thing. If not, it may not have that graphic on there, but it looks like that building. It's directly east and slightly south of Zio's, if you know where that is. Yes.
Is it dress code?
Yes, you have to dress for, it is at least business casual. So you have to wear slacks, a button-down shirt of some kind, which could be a polo if you're a male. It is business casual for females. That is, clear as what the dress code is, but something nice, not jeans, not the tank top, not a hoodie, things like that. So that's what the building looks like. This is what a really good speed sales. You won't have 90 seconds, although if you wanted to, you can put together a 90-second one and really do it. This is the number one. This was my student, Cody, who won number one in speed sell at the International Collegiate Sales Competition. Yay, me. I was his coach. I worked on this with him for like days on end. He worked on it over and over and over again, and we used it as our training video. So you can go to my YouTube and find this if you want to look at it again. So take copies of your resume, 20 copies to give to them, and dress appropriately and get stamps on a card, and then Dr. Workray will give those to me, and I will put them in a column in terms of bonus points.
Cody Trout.
Hi, my name is Cody Trump. I'm an May 2019 graduate of the Professional Sales Program at the University of Central Oklahoma. And today, I want to tell you why I should be brought in for an interview with Gartner.
Let's start that.
First of all, I want to thank you for giving me a minute of your
I know
time.
it's a little bit
I
hard.
want to attract you to why I should be brought in for an interview with Gartner. First of all, I want to thank you for giving me a minute of your time. And what attracts you to Gartner is your commitment to delivering timely and actionable data to your clients. That being said, I want to highlight the tangible factors I bring to the table, that being my sales education and my work experience, along with an intangible factor I possess that will set me apart from other candidates. First, my education. I'm going to graduate with a 4.0 from one of the top professional selling degree programs in the nation. That's given me a strong foundation and skill set that will set me up for real-world success in sales. During my time at university, I was also a 4-year starter on the golf team, but I sustained multiple serious injuries. Fighting through the adversity of those injuries has prepared me to fight through the adversity that I will inevitably face in sales. My work experience. I've been in outside sales for multiple software and technology companies. I understand how to relate your benefits to customers. Now, Gartner lists a skill necessary for success is high performance under pressure. I believe I perform my best when the lights are the brightest. That being said, I've highlighted the tangible skills I bring to the table, my sales education, and my work experience, along with the intangible quality of high performance under pressure. So what's the next step we can take to set me up an interview?
All right. So that is a good pitch. Perfect speed sell. His went about 90 seconds. You can make it shorter than that. One of the things that I encourage you to do is that even if you're not interested in the company, still go through with this, even if you're not gonna, if I find out you said, I just want to stamp on the card, I'm not gonna give you the points for that one, even if they give you the stamp of the card. They're gonna take your picture and they're gonna send it to me, and I'm not gonna give you the points. But what I encourage you to do is, even if you're really not interested in the company, go talk to them anyway, because you never know. Lots of people that will go through our sales program think that they want to go into one industry, and then they find the company. One kid that I had was one of my first sales students that graduated. He did not want to go into anything in the pipe industry, in the oil field industry. But he found a company that had really great values. I mean, he really wanted to go to work for medical device sales. That was his goal. But when he went and listened to their presentations, he contacted this company that he had seen at a career fair. It was a pipe company. It was in Arizona, and all of a sudden he started thinking, well, I really like the climate in Tucson, Arizona. It's warmer than it is in Oklahoma. It's someplace different. They had a really good corporate culture, and he figured out that it was a lot easier to make more money at that company than it was in doing medical device sales. And so he decided to go with that company. So even if you don't think you're interested in the company, go. It's an opportunity to talk about yourself. I go on job interviews all the time. I have gone on the market every semester since I have been back at UCO from New Mexico State. And I get campus interviews all the time. And some of the jobs I'm not even all that interested in, but I like to go and talk about myself. This is an opportunity for you to talk about yourself. I am my favorite topic, trust me. And you should be your favorite topic. Because if you are not engaging in self-promotion, no one else will. So use this opportunity. And again, even if you're not interested in the company, it's not just an opportunity to talk about yourself. You may find that you actually are interested in the company, but it is a really good opportunity to practice those short interview skills and talking to people under pressure. So I encourage you to go and do this. Again, you get 3 points for every company you talk to. You'll get a card when you get there. Get stamps on the card, and I'll give you those points on the next lowest exam score that is kept from the 1 through 4. So I know a lot of you didn't do real well on the first exam. This is your opportunity to ensure that you have a reasonable chance of performing well in this class on the exam portions of the exam. We need to talk today, we got a little bit off because of the snow day that we had about logic and critical thinking and writing so we've done all these critical thinking challenges in writing, and then we're going to talk about organizational behavior. Writing your paper. So you're going to do an individual paper, a article review that will be submitted to the Dropbox on D2L, and then you're going to do a longer paper as a group, and you're going to present those. And so it's important to use logic and critical thinking in those, and it's important in marketing that we make logical arguments. So just a few things, and normally I take a lot more time on this presentation because I think it's really important, but again, because of the snow day, we've got a little bit of time compression, so I'm trying to get through this and get through the organizational behavior today. I did give you the video link for last Thursday when I was gone to do consumer behavior, so everybody watched the consumer behavior link, didn't you? If you didn't, you probably should, because I take questions, obviously, from those lectures and put them on the exam. As you saw in the first exam, didn't I have the first 3 questions said as discussed in class? Something like that. And then the ethics question is obviously taken right from my lecture. So why are arguments important in marketing? I'm making an argument now. I'm saying that it's important in marketing. Why are they important? Well, it's not about fighting. A lot of times students tell me, I just don't like to argue. And they have this idea that arguing is about fighting. There's an apocryphal story about W.C. Fields. Anybody know what apocryphal means? What is an apocryphal story? Well, somebody takes the time and the imagination to get on their cell phone. Okay. Might get bonus points. Apocryphal.
It's an adjective, but it's a doubtful authenticity.
Okay. What does that mean, doubtful authenticity?
It means it's something that's widely circulated as being true.
Okay. But it's probably what?
A made-up story.
It's probably a made-up story, but it's widely circulated as true. What's the non-fancy word for apocryphal that you might think of? Fictitious,
false.
false, what else? As far as people go, a lie. How about an urban legend? That's what it is. It's an urban legend. What's one of the apocryphal stories, for example, about George Washington? That he chopped down the cherry tree, and he was so honest. When his father confronted him about it, he said, what? I cannot tell a lie. It was me. I chopped down the cherry tree. Or apple tree. I don't know. That's an I don't think, I don't know. I mean, I've never really seen historians write a whole lot about that. But the idea is that he was a really honest person, and he was our first president. And he was just such a great guy that he had admitted to his sin, right? And didn't tell a lie. He chopped down the tree. That's probably not true. So there's an apocryphal story about W.C. Fields. I was not old enough to remember W.C. Fields, but I did watch W.C. Fields films at things like Nick at Night when I was growing up. He was an older comedian and character actor, kind of a large guy, and he made a lot of funny statements throughout his life. One of which is, he said, a famous quote of W.C. Fields is, "Women are like elephants to me. I like to look at them, but I never want to own one." And he was said to be coming out of a bar, dead drunk in the middle of the day. And a woman approaches him and says, "Mr. Fields, you're drunk. You're a drunkard." And he said, "Yes, madam, but you're ugly, and in the morning I'll be sober." Meaning that he could cure what ailed him, that there was no cure for her, right? Now that would likely get you, some heated exchanges between this aggressive individual and Mr. Fields. It might result in coming to blows. Is that an argument? That's technically not an argument. That's a fight. And so arguments are not about fighting, but people generally mistake them as being about fighting. And so they say things like, "I just don't like to argue." But arguments are important. So what are arguments really about? They're about providing good reasons why you should buy a product or service or support an idea or belief system, right? And we make them all the time, whether we think about it or not. We make arguments constantly. Coke is better than Pepsi. Well, why is that? That's an argument. Well, then I need to support that argument with some rationale. Why is Coke better than Pepsi? Pepsi is a communist company. Well, that's not a very good argument, because we all know that Pepsi's not a communist company. They really want to sell their product just as much as Coke does. They compete with Coke. It's always a toss-up as to who has the bigger market share, and depends kind of on how you measure market share in many instances, how you massage the data. But it's about making good and valid reasons why you should support a position, why you should buy something, why you should take an action, engage in a course of conduct. So the first rule in making good arguments is about structure. We use these words, and a lot of times in arguments, we use words and we don't clearly define them. And so we use things like valid and invalid and true and false, and we think they mean the same things. They don't. So it's really important to be precise in your wording. Valid and invalid go to the structure of an argument. True and false relate to whether or not there is a basis in reality for your argument. You can construct logic games that have no basis in reality that are valid arguments. In fact, I scored very well before I went to law school. You have to take a test. It's called the LSAT. I did really well on it because I was good at logic and critical thinking, and all of the arguments are logic and critical thinking on the LSAT, and they ask you to identify things, and they come up with things that don't even exist. And they ask you if certain statements can be true. So a very simple one would be, all quarks are snarks. some snarks are moles. Therefore, is it possible that some quarks are moles? Something like that, right? So you have to be able to group them into sets and figure out whether or not that's possible, and that would be something that's possible. So that's the structure of the argument, true and false. There's no such thing as a quark, a snark. There is such a thing as a mole. It's a little creature that burrows in the ground. But the other two I just made up off the top of my head as an example here, standing in class, right? So what we want is we want both a logical structure in our argument. We want this structure to be valid, and we want it to be true. So here's an example, very simple example. If it rains, the streets get wet. It rained, therefore the streets are wet. That is a validly structured argument. If it rains, the streets are going to get wet. It's rained, therefore the streets are wet. If I look out there today, is that true? No, not yet. It's sort of looking like it might rain, but has it? No, it hasn't. So if I said that on a day when it's 105 degrees in the middle of August, when we have our dry season after the monsoon season has ended, it would not be true, right? We have lots of days. Several years ago, we had a summer where we had 60 days. I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago. We had 60 days of over 100-degree heat and no rain. And the earth was so parched in Oklahoma City that water mains were breaking because it was causing shifts in the earth's crust itself. It was so dry that it was causing them to break. And so that wouldn't have been true if I'd said it on those days. It hadn't rained in 60 days or something like that, and we had over 100 degrees, dry as a bone. But it would be a validly structured argument. So again, we want them to be structured in a correct way, and we want them to be true. What's an incorrect structure? What's an example of that? Well, this is one of those types of invalid structures is something called denying the antecedent. If it rains, the streets get wet. It did not rain, therefore the streets are not wet. This is an invalidly structured. Now, it may be true, right? If it rains, the streets get wet. It didn't rain. It's not raining out there. And then you say, therefore the streets are not wet. Now, what's wrong with denying the antecedent in terms of the structure of the argument? It looks a lot like that first argument is what we call the modus ponens, the mode of putting in the argument. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal, right? That's the mode of putting, the classic example. What's wrong with the structure of this one? Why is it invalid?
There's no point to put if it rains, the streets get wet, because, I mean, you're not talking about it raining. Like, it didn't rain, so you don't need to be bringing in the streets are getting wet if it rains.
No?
It's cutting out any other possible.
It's cutting out any other, it overlooks other alternatives. There are a million other reasons the streets could be wet, right? So denying the antecedent overlooks alternatives. It's one of the two greatest logical fallacies. One of two greatest logical fallacies are overlooking alternatives. Why could the streets get wet other than it rained?
Somebody's water hose or something.
Somebody's water hose is running on the streets. The fire hydrant they're testing the fire hydrants and the streets get wet. The dam breaks and the streets get wet, right? Water leak from the main. We have all of that shifting of the ground in that 60 days of 100-degree heat. And we have a water main that busts and it floods the streets. So there are lots of other reasons that the street can get wet. So we don't want to deny the antecedent. You're making arguments, think about these things. Think, are there alternatives? Always be asking yourself, are there alternatives to what I'm saying? If you are saying, and particularly in arguments about marketing, when we start saying things like always and never, you may be problematic, right? In physics, sometimes you can say always and never, but in marketing, It's very rarely you can say always and never. If you always do this, people will, reject your product. Well, maybe 90% of the time they'll reject your product, but not always, generally speaking. In chemistry, you can say always. If we combine, what is the chemical composition of salt? Anybody remember? I think sodium chloride, isn't it? Isn't that it's sodium chloride? If you combine sodium chloride in the right molecular structure, you always get salt, right? You're always going to, but in marketing, overlooking alternatives can be problematic. You have to distinguish between your premise and conclusion. Don't use your conclusion as a premise. This is one of my favorite ones. When I used to teach philosophy, I used to teach philosophy a long time ago at junior college, one of my first jobs. We would have arguments about the existence of God. That's one of the things that we argue about in philosophy. And I would have students who would say things like this: the Bible is the word of God who wrote it. The Bible says God exists, therefore God exists. This is problematic from a couple of standpoints. God did not sit down at the cosmic computer and pound out the Bible and hand it to Moses on Mount Sinai, right? That's not what happened. I mean, I actually had a student tell me this, that is what happened. God handed him that. No, that's not what happened. What can we say about the Bible for those of us who are believers? Well, the Bible is the word of God through the words of man speaking in the idiom of his time. Man wrote the Bible. It is divinely inspired. But God did not sit down at the big Dell computer in the sky and type it out. You're relying upon the thing you're trying to prove as proof. This is called circular reasoning, or petito principe. And you find people doing this all the time. It's also commonly called begging the question. Order. Present your ideas in a natural order. In history, what's that order going to be for the most part? What's going to be the natural order in terms of historical arguments? One of the things I was listening to, because I'm an academic, I go to other kinds of academics lectures from time to time in the topics that I'm interested in. And I was listening to a historian named W.H. Brands. He's probably the foremost popular academic historian right now. So there are people that write just academic stuff that's dry and dusty, and most people never read it because, it's just sort of what is debated among historians. But H.W. Brands is actually a guy that a lot of people read. He writes a lot of popular books. He's a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, and he writes a lot of popular books on historical figures, particularly presidents. And one of his most recent books is a book on U.S. Grant, which I'm interested in because my father was named for two uncles, and one of his uncles, who's named Grant, was named that because his father had fought in the Civil War on the side of the North. So he named him after the commanding general of his army. So I am, in a roundabout way named after Grant, and I like Grant, and H.W. Brands wrote this book on Grant. And he really thinks that we should rethink Grant's presidency. Nobody doubts that Grant was a great general. But a lot of historians roundly argue that Grant was a horrible president. If you take polls of historians all the time, they will list Grant. The three lowest presidents are generally Ulysses S. Grant, Herbert Hoover, Grant, and Nixon are generally the three lowest ranked presidents. I'm going to tell you that George W. Bush is also ranked really, really low on the presidential historian poll. And I suspect that at the end of this president's term, he will be ranked the lowest. I mean, I have a sneaky suspicion. Well, HW Brands looks at Grant's president and says, no, actually Grant did a lot of great things as president. Maybe we should rethink it. He had some scandals and he relied on some people, but he did do these things in terms of getting us over, having gone through the Civil War and Reconstruction and things like that, and engaging in nation building. And so maybe we should rethink his presidency. And he says that one of the things that made Grant really good as a thinker was his ability to react under pressure in a very calm and collected manner. And so he goes through this whole argument. And so it's largely historical. You're going to talk about this set of facts that happened during this era and then move along, right? If you are a marketer, we generally don't think about things in terms of historical stuff. We think about things in terms of maybe a primacy effect. So an inverted pyramid. If you go to journalism school, they tell you should write your first paragraph so that it contains most of your information, because most people stop doing what after the first paragraph? So they do an inverted pyramid. They pay attention to the first paragraph. They're going to look at the headline and maybe read a few sentences. The headline may be something like, spree of burglaries overnight in Oklahoma City. And then under that, people are going to look at the paper. In the olden days, when people actually looked at papers, but now you read it on CNN or MSNBC or whatever news source you get. Real News is a new one that's popped up that's supposed to be more fair and balanced, or Fox, if that's where you gather your news from. They're going to start with the headline, President visits North Korea. And then in that next paragraph, the president is currently visiting the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to discuss nuclear disarmament on the Korean Peninsula. Right? And from that, you get the gist of the argument, or the gist of the point of the story, which is that the president's gone abroad, he's meeting with Kim Jong-un, and he's discussing nuclear disarmament. And then the rest of it, you're going to fill in with they're going to meet for 2 hours, in the morning, and then the principals from each side will meet, and then they'll have a summit, and then they'll draft an agreement. And most people have stopped reading by that point. So you might want to organize it with regard to the primacy effect. When we do sampling, we are aware of this. So for example, one of the things that I've done, I used to work with a professor from OSU who was in the hospitality business, and we had a research firm, and we would do actual field tests for companies. One of the ones that we did a field test for was orange leaf. And so one of the things that we know in tasting things like orange leaf, what does orange leaf make? Anybody know? They make yogurt, frozen yogurt. One of the things we know is that when you field test stuff like that, and we use students to do it, they're going to like the first bite of the orange yogurt or the orange leaf yogurt or whatever yogurt you're giving them the most, because it's the one that they haven't been accustomed to the taste yet. And they're going to remember that one first. And so you have to switch up in order to get a really good representation of the samples. You have to switch up between the products that you're differentiating, the order in which you place them among equal sets of groups, so that no one has a primacy effect all the time, and you get a truer taste test accuracy. Then you might have a more traditional pyramidal shape where you start with your weakest argument and then build, and that's called the recency effect. The idea is leave them knowing what your strongest argument is. Leave them with your strongest argument, because they're going to remember that most recently. So those are some ways that you can present your ideas in a natural order. We generally don't talk about history in terms of marketing, but if you are doing your paper on, for example, a large company, like the release of the iPhone, you might want to present it in a historical fashion, because what's happening? Sales of the iPhone, when the iPhone released, what happens in terms of a product release? Well, generally you have an introductory stage. Products have a life cycle, and it starts out kind of slow, and then it maybe picks up, levels off, and then it declines. And the iPhone has been around for quite a while, and so it's what's happening to these sales. You might take a historical approach with that. If you're arguing that Apple really needs to up their game, because what's happening to sales of the iPhone right now? They're dropping. Why? Because people are tired of spending, $1,000 every couple of years just to get the latest and greatest thing that's not really all that much different. The first few versions of the iPhone were radically different from each other. They had a lot of technology that was really, really transforming it. But now, is there much difference between an 8 and a 10? I mean, in terms of substantive features, Not really. Not much in terms of the way you really enjoy it. There's not a whole lot there. So you might use a historical, but a lot of times we use either the recency or the primacy effect. You have to avoid, this is the rule number 4, emotionally charged language. What's emotionally charged language? Well, I see this used a lot, and I'm not sure that it's ethical or it's even good. Let's look at an ad. Hit the wrong exit button, sorry.
It's hard to believe it's been 8 years since I made that commercial. And now I'm a 10-year survivor.
Today's a special day, a big milestone to me. I'm out here riding my horse, appreciating every minute of it.
My life changed the day I was diagnosed with cancer. It was hard when I was lying in the hospital and didn't know if anybody survived pancreatic cancer, that I decided.
All right, let's stop right there. This is an argument. What's the argument? Oh, I went to CTCA and now I'm out here riding my horse. Your horse has nothing to do with your treatment. Right? You know, this is emotionally charged, isn't it? It's an emotionally, if you survive, if you go to CTCA, you'll be out there like Peggy, riding a horse. Or whatever it is that you want to do. That's the implicit argument that they're making here, isn't it? That's a bad argument. It's emotionally charged. Look, doesn't she look happy?
No.
And no? Doesn't she look healthy? I'm not sure that horse is enjoying it, you know, but you know, old Peggy looks just thrilled.
If I survive this, I want to offer hope to somebody else and to show them that there are people out there like Cancer Treatment Centers of America who can make a difference.
To find out more about Cancer Treatment Centers of America and our unique treatment options for complex and late-stage cancer, go to cancercenter.com. You'll be able to see our treatment results for many types of cancers and how they compare to national averages. You can also check for participating insurance plans.
The doctors looked over what they need.
All right. Now that part of the argument, you can go and you can compare. I will tell you that their rates are horrible when you compare them to MD Anderson, who does not advertise. Right? And if you got cancer, I suggest you go to MD Anderson, not to CTCA. There's a CTCA in Tulsa. I would hightail my self right down to Houston if I had cancer. But that's at least a substantive argument. You can see how we compare. You can see our treatment options that we list. Those are substantive arguments. Those are non-emotive. Those are fairly good arguments to make.
Needed to do for me, but the decision was always mine.
At Cancer Treatment Centers of America, every resource, every one of us, everything we do every day is focused on you, our patient, your treatment, your healing, your survival.
After cancer now, I just appreciate life so much more. I appreciate the little things.
Being able to carry a bucket of water for my horse in the end was like running a marathon. Not 1 hour goes by that I don't stop and think about how fortunate I was to have found CTCA.
Our teams of physicians, clinicians, and nurses are highly experienced and dedicated. We use state-of-the-art technology and give you innovative treatment options you may not even know exist. You'll also experience whole-person compassionate care here, unlike anything you've seen before.
When I talk to people, they say, oh my,
What the hell does that mean? You'll get whole compassionate care. Does that mean that MD Anderson, you know, wheels you out in the gurney and says, you're gonna die? What the hell does that mean? I mean, most cancer doctors are fairly compassionate. That's impossible to evaluate. That's a bad argument. I'm not saying that this isn't an effective ad, by the way. I think it is. But as far as an argument goes, it's not a very good argument. You start breaking it down. And I think,
Gosh, a 10-year survivor, I can't believe it. Life is good and I just appreciate it totally.
I'm doing things I never dreamt I would do.
Every minute counts when you're fighting cancer, so please call or visit cancercenter.com today. Appointments are available now. Cancer Treatment Centers of America. Care that never quits.
So you should avoid that, particularly in your reports. I'm not saying that emotions don't work in advertisements, they do. I think they're ethically suspect. But there's a difference between most preferred and preferred by most. And I think companies that do a good job avoid this kind of fluff in many instances. Right? Now, of course, it depends on sort of the product you're selling. If you're selling Doritos, it's hard not to have a whole lot of fluff. Because there's nothing about a Dorito that's anything but fluff. It has no nutritional value for you. Tastes good, love it. One of my favorite things to do is drink beer and eat Doritos. It's just great. Makes me happy, but it's hard to make that product anything other than sort of a emotional appeal. But in arguing in this, at least, you want to be avoiding these emotionally charged things, emotionally charged language. And I think most companies would do well to do that. Use consistent terms. Don't switch terminology. We're the greatest. We're the biggest. A lot of times people make those kinds of claims. They switch terms. There's a difference between the greatest and the biggest, isn't there? One is just what? If you compare Walmart and Target, which is the biggest, Walmart is by far bigger. In terms of the store qualities, are they greater?
No.
No. Most people would argue what? Target is a better quality, more pleasant experience that may, if you define greatness in those ways. So don't confuse those terms, things like that. Stick to one meaning for each term. And I give you a brilliant marketing example here. There was a book by a guy who has a fake PhD, totally fake PhD, didn't go get a real doctor's degree. And he wrote this book called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And he sold a lot of copies. And what does it say? It sounds great. It's a catchy title. And what's his premise in the whole book? What'd you guess? Just if you haven't read the book, you don't have to read the book to know what the book is about.
Men are from Mars.
Well, what does that mean?
They're very different.
Yeah, men and women think differently, duh, right? That's what it means. You could sum up the entire book. And he offers really no hard evidence for that. Now, it sounds intuitively appealing, but he uses a lot of sloppy terms in that book. We see this a lot. Samples, and we see this used in marketing a lot. 9 out of 10 dentists recommend Colgate. Well, what do you want to know about that? What makes it good? What would be good? They used to say Tylenol, the #1 prescribed painkiller in hospitals. You know why it was the #1 prescribed painkiller in hospitals? Because they gave it to the hospitals for free. And the hospitals then, if you needed a painkiller, would do what? They gave it to you and charged you for it. That's a good deal. Somebody's giving me product and letting me charge somebody else for it for free. I'm going to take all of that product I can get. So make sure the statistics are good statistics and the samples are representative. No amount of anecdotal evidence constitutes a scientific sample. No amount whatsoever constitutes a scientific sample. You can have 1,000 friends, all of whom love Donald Trump. That does not mean that the vast majority of Americans love Donald Trump. You have 1,000, you and your 1,000 friends can love Coca-Cola. Doesn't mean that everybody loves Coca-Cola, or that they're representative of the population as a whole. No amount. You could have 2,000 friends. Proportionality. We see these a lot. Analogies are used a lot in marketing. Compared to the ingredients in, they must be proportionally equal. If they're not, you can file claims with the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. So when Walmart's Equate brand, isn't that Walmart's store label brand is Equate? Is that right? When they say compared to the active ingredients in Listerine, it's basically what? What's the only difference between Listerine and the Equate brand that they're offering? What should be the only difference? The branding, that's obviously different. They put it in a different bottle. They probably use a different dye in it. They're both green, but they may use, green number 38 as opposed to green number 40. And they probably use a slightly different what? Flavoring base. They're not using the exact same thing. But other than that, it says compared to, what does that mean? What are the active ingredients, basically, in Listerine that kill germs? It's alcohol. That's what it is. Citation. If you're going to use authorities, they have to be cited. They have to be qualified. Just because somebody has a PhD does not make them qualified. I don't have a PhD in climate science, therefore I'm not qualified to, make judgments on climate science. You have to avoid ad hominem attacks. That means avoid attacking the person rather than their argument. What are ad hominem attacks? No sensitive person believes. That's an ad hominem attack. You're basically saying that anybody who supports a position is not sensitive. No sensitive person believes that, end of life suicide decisions should be allowed. Well, there's a whole lot of argument there. There are lots of countries in the world where the United States is not one of them. But there are countries that you can go to if you have a terminal disease and you can end your life. And say, that's morally bankrupt, or anybody who does that is insensitive. Well, there's a movie about this, kind of a sad movie. How many of you have seen it, called Me Before You? With the guy from the Hunger Games. Anybody seen that? And the girl who plays this nurse is the one who plays on Game of Thrones. She looks radically different in that movie than she does in Game of Thrones. She's kind of awkward. Correlation doesn't equal. This is the second great logical fallacy. Correlation does not equal causation. So the first great logical fallacy is overlooking alternatives. The second is assuming causation merely by succession in time or something else. So there was an academic paper about this very idea that was entitled Toaster Ovens Determine Insterility in India. And what they did is they did a study, and it perfectly correlates. The number of electronic appliances in a home is directly proportional and correlates exactly to the low number of births of families in India. So the more electronic devices you had, if you lived in India, the fewer children. It was an inverse correlation, an inverse slope. The fewer children you had. So if you assumed causation based on mere correlation, you would say that what? Electronic devices were leading to people being infertile. Is that true? Does watching too much television make you infertile? What's going on there? Why do people who have more electronic devices in India have fewer kids? Are those electronic devices somehow zapping their life force out of them, causing cancer of the reproductive organs?
I think they are getting awareness.
They're what?
They're getting awareness watching television.
They're getting awareness by watching television?
Yeah, because like most of the people are uneducated. So
That may be a very good reason why. It correlates perfectly. If you have 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 appliances in your home, you're less likely to have a whole lot of kids. What's probably going on there? The more electronic devices you have in your home in India, the more likely you are to be a member of the economic elite, and the less likely you are to have a large family. Does that make sense? Yeah, so correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation. Avoid complex questions, double-barreled questions. Conflating two things. Forcing a commitment on an individual. I gave you an example of this with the EPQ that says, having a rigidly codified ethical code could lead to bad human relations and development. Well, those are two separate things. And so you should avoid that. Avoid double-barreled questions in your research. Any questions on that? I don't really have time to get into organizational behavior, so I'm going to end there. I'm giving you 20 minutes extra today. If you feel cheated, you let me know on Thursday and we'll stay late. Because I'll just start on organizational behavior and move it. So I'll start it and I'll try to get through that faster and move on to next to get us caught up. I will get there. Be sure and sign the roll if you haven't. I will send out an email on the text systems, what you need to do for that. If you have a question, yes, sir.
Yeah, is it too late to sign up for the sales portion of the event?
For the sales portion of the event?
Yeah, remember the speed sale thing?
Yes, it is. We're only doing speed sales among competitors.
Okay.
Internal, we open it to everybody.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, so I'll stop the video.